This is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Spooky Eyeball Squish, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. This pattern is made using a USL 8mm crochet hook. This one happens to be by Susan Bates. We also use approximately 230 yards of Bernat blanket. I used a black color, coal, dark teal for the pupil. Of course, you can change that out to whatever you like. Vintage white is what I used for the white. Any of the white colors will work. And of course, any of the reds to add these veins to the back, which are, of course, totally optional if they freak you out a little bit. To stuff it, I used a 10-inch Microbead Pillow Ball, but you can use that or fiberfill, whichever you prefer. I do have a link to the ball on the blog with the written pattern. I also, of course, used some stitch markers, and I do recommend that you have some handy when you make this pattern. Let's go ahead and take a look at our finished Spooky Eyeball Squish. The Spooky Eyeball Squish uses the same base ball pattern, essentially, as the other series of squishes that you'll find on Moogly blog. However, it turns it on its head a little bit, no pun intended, with what's usually the belly becoming the front part of our eye, and then the body becoming the back part. So I have, of course, completely rewritten it for this pattern. We make this eyeball in two pieces. We make through most of the blue in one piece, and then if you look very closely, you can see right there, this piece is whip stitched to the other piece, which covers the rest of the ball and ends with one row of blue to help hide that seam. On the back here, you can see all these fun red crochet veins for our eyeball. These are, of course, optional. If they freak you out, you don't like them, you don't have to add them. You can just make it a regular old eyeball. But for Halloween and spooky season, they're just extra fun. These are added with surface crochet. So we just add these willy-nilly as you're going. I recommend you break your ball of red yarn up into several smaller balls and then just start adding lines as you go. And as you add more rows, you can add another little section, finish it off, add more as you go. And then, of course, we'll finish all those off before we sew the whole thing together. I should point out, too, there's a little trick to adding this little guy, and I'll be sure to go over that with you here in just a moment. So the first piece that we make for our Spooky Eyeball Squish is the pupil and iris. And of course, we start in the center with the pupil, and I do recommend that you use whichever shade of black you prefer. So with our color A or our black yarn, we're going to start by making a magic circle. So I go over the forefinger of my non-hook hand twice towards me, just like that. Then I'm going to insert my hook under both of those loops, grab the loop that's a little furthest back, pull it under the other one, yarn over, and pull that loop through. Then when I crochet, I'm going to go into that loop or that ring around my finger and be sure to catch that tail in each stitch. At this point, I also want to have a stitch marker handy. There's one right there. We're going to make sure to keep a stitch marker in the first stitch of each round because we are going to be working in a spiral. So it's going to be a lot harder to see where our rounds end and begin without that stitch marker. So all that said, we've got our magic circle on our finger here. So we're going to go ahead and start our round with a chain one and then a single crochet right back into the ring. Now, as I make that stitch, I can go ahead and pull my finger out of the way there. We've got our first stitch made, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch. Now, I know black yarn can be hard to see. You can see we have a really bright light here. That helps me quite a bit more in person possibly than on camera. But you want to do the same thing when you're working with dark yarns at home. Have a nice bright light next to you and have a light colored surface. This will help you sort of see any gaps between your stitches and sort of help you see where to stick your hook and just make it a whole lot easier to see your project in general. So now I'm going to continue working around for our first round. After that first single crochet, we make 9 half double crochets into this ring for a total of 10 stitches. So there's our first half double crochet and our second one. And I want you to notice again, I'm going into that ring and I'm catching that tail end in each stitch. So we'll keep doing half double crochets until we have a total of 10 stitches in round one. So now I've got 10 stitches made, but I'm not going to join to that first stitch with a slip stitch. When we work in a spiral, we do not do that. After you've got your total of 10 stitches, single crochet, 9 half double crochets, then we can go ahead and pull on that tail end really gently and close up that circle. If you feel like it's going to break before you get the center circle closed as much as you'd like, you can go ahead and just tighten that up when you weave in that end with your yarn needle. So for now, let's go ahead and continue on to round 2. For round 2, we're going to work 2 half double crochets in each stitch around. So if we had 10 stitches in round 1, we'll end up with 20 stitches in round 2. And because we're working in a spiral, we start not with a chain 1, we just start by working our stitch right into that first stitch there. So if the stitch marker is in the way, you can go ahead and take that out for a moment. And now this is our new first stitch of the round, and we want to go ahead and be sure to mark that. There we go. Then we put a second half double crochet in that same stitch. And then we do the same thing all the way around. We only need the one stitch marker, but we need 2 half double crochet stitches in each stitch around. So I'll see you when we get to the end of round 2. So here's what it should look like after round 2 with a total of 20 half double crochets. To continue with round 3, we of course are going to start here in our first marked stitch, or our only marked stitch in this case, and our repeat is half double crochet in the next stitch, 2 half double crochets in the stitch after that, and that's our repeat all around. So 1, then 2, 1, then 2, 1, then 2, all the way around, and that will give us a total of 30 half double crochets. So I'll start here by putting our first half double crochet in our first stitch. And I always want to make sure to move that stitch marker up. You can see how working in a spiral, the beginning and end of the round just isn't as obvious. There we go. So we've got our half double crochet in the first stitch. Then we put 2 half double crochets in the stitch after that. 1 and 2. Oop, get that pulled through. There we go. And that's our repeat. 1 half double crochet in the next stitch. 2 half double crochets in the stitch after that. You can see I am working pretty tightly, and that's something we want when we're making a pattern like this. We don't want to work crazy tightly so we can't get our hook through, but tight enough so that we get a nice solid fabric. So continue to stitch in that pattern all the way around here for round 3, and I'll see you when we're ready for round 4. And this is what it should look like at the end of round 3. So as we prepare for round 4, please note that, of course, we're going to have a little bit of a different repeat, but our last stitch of this round is going to be worked in the back loop only, and on that very last stitch, we will change over to color B, whatever color you want your iris to be. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start stitching this round normally, and then we'll bring this in for that very last stitch. So looking at round 4, our repeat is 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, and then half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. So the repeat would be 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, all the way around. We just treat that last stitch a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and get it started together, and then we'll come back together for the end. So beginning round 4, we work 2 half double crochets in the first stitch. I just like to move that stitch marker out of the way for just a moment. I'm going to get that in our new first stitch here right away. Oop, get it under both of those loops. There we go. And then we need a second half double crochet in that same stitch. And then 1 half double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. So 1 in the next stitch and 1 in the stitch after that. And then that repeat again. 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. 1 and 2. And then a half double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. 1 and 1. So as I say, that's our repeat all the way around, and I'll see you again as we come up to that last stitch. All right, so I've got one more repeat left here to make in round 4. I can tell I've got 3 stitches left. I'm in the right spot. So let's go ahead and do that repeat together here. We're going to work 2 half double crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2, and then 1 in the next stitch. And then this very last one is where things get a little funky. We want to have our color B end ready and waiting for us here. Let me get that straightened out. There we go. And then we are going to work this next stitch in the back loop only. So let me turn our work here to the side a little bit. Hopefully you can see, and it might be harder to see in this. Let me actually pull up a stitch in a brighter color here. This is just a granny square I have laying around, so bear with me, but it's going to be easier to see the stitches in this brighter color. What I want you to look for is at the top of your stitch. No matter what type of stitch you're making, you're going to have those 2 loops at the top. The front loop is the loop that's closest to you, and the back loop is the loop that's furthest away. It's always relative to you, the crocheter. It doesn't matter if I turn my work, this is the front loop, that's the back loop. So for this next stitch, what we want to do is work our half double crochet in the back loop only, leaving that front loop unworked. So what you can do if you need a little extra help with this is I'd pull up another stitch marker or a scrap piece of yarn if you don't have another stitch marker. And then we're just going to grab just that front loop only. And we can actually put our stitch marker in it and leave it right there. We want to mark that front loop because we're going to come back and use it later. And now it's going to be a little easier to see. We can yarn over and put our hook right in the center of that stitch. And you can kind of see here if I pull everything out of the way, I hope. It's under just the back loop of that stitch, not under both of those top two loops like we normally use. So now I will go ahead and pull up my loop, but instead of yarning over and pulling over, I'm going to go ahead and drop this color, pick up my color B, whatever color you want your eye to be, essentially. And then we yarn over with our new color and finish the stitch with this one, just like that. Easy peasy. From here, we're going to be continuing to crochet with our pupil color, or our iris color, excuse me. This is the pupil. The iris is the colored part around it. So we're going to be continuing with that. We are done with the center here. So you can go ahead and take your scissors and break your color A. Be sure to leave a long tail to weave it in nicely when you're all done. But now we're ready to continue with the rest of our front of our eye. So just like here in round 4, we had a little extra action right at the end. As we do round 5, we're going to have a little extra action right at the end where we're going to be using that unused front loop with color C. So this is where we're going to bring in our white color as well, but just for a couple stitches, so you'll want to have that close by and ready. So let's begin our round 5 here. And again, we're working with our color B. Doesn't have to be blue. It can be whatever color you want your eye to be. So we're going to begin this round by half double crocheting in the next 3 stitches. And as always, I want to continue to move that first stitch marker on up, and you can go ahead and work over your ends if you want to at this point. I do recommend you finally weave them in before you do finish your project, but I do like to tack them down with a couple of stitches. So they don't go anywhere or pull out while I'm doing my stitching. There we go. So that is our first half double crochet in the round. We begin this repeat with half double crochet in these first 3 stitches. There's 1, 2, and 3. Oh, I need to pull up a little bit more of my yarn here. And then we're going to continue our repeat with 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So that's going to be our repeat. 1, 1, 1, 2. So let's do the 2 together here. 1 and 2. And then we do that repeat again. We'll do it one more time together here. 1, 1, 1, and then 2. 1 and 2. So we're just going to continue this all the way around until we come up to that last repeat. So I'll see you when we've got just a few stitches left here of round 5. All right, so there are only 4 stitches left for me to work into, so we know we're on track for our last repeat here. So we begin just as like we did before, half double crochet in the first 3 stitches. And then if you're following along with the written pattern, you'll know after that there is a set of double asterisks, which means that's where we stop our final repeat because we are going to finish that third one of those half double crochets with our color C, our white color. We're going to add that little flash or bling or whatever you want to call it, the little bit of shine to our eye right here. So again, it's our last repeat on round 5. The last half double crochet, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to stop, yarn over with my color C here, my white, whatever, version of the white Bernat blanket you want to use or have handy or could find in your store. There we go. And now, do not cut your color B here. Just let that hang out. We're going to come back to it. We're going to make just 2 stitches here with our color C. And they're going to be double crochets worked into that unused front loop down here. So that's why we left our stitch marker there, so it's a little easier to see it and find it. And we're just going to drop right down into there. We're going to leave that stitch behind it completely unworked. So we yarn over. We're going to come down here. We still want to go from underneath the loop. Sometimes it's easier to catch it with your hook. There we go. I'm going to move that stitch marker on out of the way. We definitely don't need that there anymore. There we are. So we still want to come from underneath the loop. We don't want to try and come down forwards from behind. Yarn over, pull our loop up and through, and finish our double crochet. just like that. Then we need one more. I'm going to yarn over again. Go again, right through that same loop. Whole lot easier the second time to find it. Yarn over, pull up our loop. Yarn over, pull through 2, stop with 2 loops left here on the hook. I'm going to drop my white yarn, find that end of the blue yarn that's still attached to my skein and hanging out here, and just gently bring that up, yarn over, and pull through, just like that. Those 2 double crochets are the only white we're going to have right here for a while. So now we can go ahead and cut off our color C. Again, we want to leave a nice long tail so we can weave in our ends really nicely when we're all done. There we go. And it's a little bit hiding. Don't let it disappear. Make sure our next stitch goes into the first stitch of the next round. But this is what it should look like at the end of round 5. All right, so now we're ready to continue with round 6, and we're back to color B. So we're going to half double crochet in the first stitch. Again, push those stitches over out of the way if you need to. Make sure you work in that first marked stitch there. I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch with our stitch marker now. There we go. And then our repeat for this one, after we half double crochet in the first stitch, we work 2 half double crochet in the next stitch, and then half double crochet in the next 3. And that's a really long sort of split repeat. And we do that so that our increases, or the stitches where we have 2 stitches worked in, don't line up and create a visual seam that we'll see with our eyes. We want to move those increases around a little bit. And this is where we're doing that in this pattern. So let's work through this together for a little bit. We've got this half double crochet in the first one. We want our increase, our 2 half double crochets here in the second stitch. And then we half double crochet in the next 3. So 1, 2, and 3. But where a lot of people sort of screw up is they don't realize you need to go all the way back to the beginning of that repeat. They'll go back to the increase, but that's the same increase we had in the previous round. If we do that, then our eye will start to cup or bowl up too soon. We want to keep it relatively still flat here at this point. So we want to make sure to begin again at the beginning of that repeat, which is half double crochet in the next stitch, then 2 in the next stitch, 1 and 2, and then a little bit more yarn there, 1 in each of the next 3. So you'll actually have 4 single half double crochets, if you will, in between the paired half double crochets. So if you want to go back, and if it's easier for you to count it that way, you can say 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Just know that when you come around to the end, it's going to be a little off. Whatever makes it easier for you to count, just make sure you've got those 4 in between your 2. Other than that, this is a standard round. Just continue on around, making those increases and working in pattern, and I'll see you when we get to the end of round 6. So here we are finished with round 6, and you'll notice we've got our increase there, and then we half double crocheted in each of those last 3 stitches, and that includes those last 2 double crochets. Once again, that stitch that we skipped back here, we ignore it, it stays unworked. So now we're ready for round 7, and round 7 is really where we just kind of finish up and round up the outer part of our iris here, and then we set this piece aside to be sewn onto the rest of it later. So to finish up here with round 7, we move to single crochet for the first stitch here, single crochet in that first stitch. And you can put the stitch marker in there if you want to, but you don't need to, certainly. We don't need to mark that stitch anymore. We single crochet in the first one, and then slip stitch in the stitch after that. And then what we want to do is break our yarn and do a seamless join in the next stitch. But when we break our yarn for this piece, we want to leave a really long tail so that we can sew it onto the other piece of our eye. If you forget and end up cutting off a shorter yarn end and you don't have enough to sew it on with, leave your long end onto the other piece and sew it on from the other side. We're going to end the other piece with blue as well. So I prefer to do it from this side, but it really, in the end, it doesn't matter. Just make sure to, like I say, leave it on the other piece if you don't. And if you don't, you can just cut a whole new piece to sew them together as well. So my tip, when you want to leave a long end for sewing, I, of course, want to cut a end that is long enough to do the sewing that I need to do, but not so long that, it becomes cumbersome and starts getting tangled. So my little trick for that is to just sort of look at the perimeter, the outline of what I want to sew. In this case, we're going around the iris, and I'm just going to gently lay my yarn right around that line. very unscientifically, about 3 times. I'll come back to my hook here. There's twice. 2.5 I find is usually more than enough, but I like to go 3 because I would rather have a little too much and maybe waste a little bit more yarn rather than have to cut off a whole nother section of yarn and have 2 more ends and more seaming to do. So now that I've gone around it 3 times, I'll go ahead and cut that. Again, I'm not being exact by any means, but I find that this is usually more than enough to sew that piece on with. So to now fully finish this piece up before we set it aside, we want to just go ahead and pull up on that last stitch. Let me set that hook aside here. And then you do have to take a little bit of time because we've got that long end here. We're going to just take our time and pull that through. There we go. And then when we get to that end, we can find one of our yarn needles. There we are. And put our yarn on there. Now this is a 6 super bulky weight yarn, so you want to use a yarn needle with a larger eye if you've got it. And then I'm going to actually pull that tail through a little bit more so I have a little more control of the yarn here. There we go. And then I want to do a seamless join in this next stitch. I could do it in this next stitch and pull it really tight, or I could do it in the stitch after that and sort of duplicate the stitch on top. I do want to have the same stitch count on this piece that I end up with on my other piece so that we can sew stitch to stitch all the way around. So that's really the only reason we need to be at all fussy about where we sew it in here. So what I'd like to do, because I really want a nice gentle curve here to my eye, rather than going to the very next stitch, I'm going to go to the stitch after that and put my sewing needle here. You can see right under those top 2 loops. Then I'm going to pull this all the way through. Oop, I pulled it. So far I got more tail. There we go. There, now it's all the way through. And what we want to do is with our sewing is basically mimic the top of the stitch that we're on top of so that our stitch count stays the same, but we've got a nice smooth finish here. So we're going to go right back into the stitch we came out of. Our strand goes here around that stitch and then underneath just that back loop. And that's going to give it the look, once I pull that tail through there, of any other stitch. There we go. So I can tighten that up, zhuzh it, loosen it up if necessary, and just make it look like any of the other stitches. Now, normally I would say weave in your end, but definitely you can go ahead and just leave this one right on your sewing needle if you want to sew it in later. But that said, you do want to go ahead and take a moment and weave in all your other ends. Just go ahead and make sure that leave that long last end still unwoven in so you can do it to sew your pieces together. And now it's time to make the rest of the eyeball. You can see here I've already worked up the first 5 rounds, and these are all just like the rounds that we did before for the pupil and iris, but we don't have to do any color changes, and we get to work under both loops the whole time. Much simpler, just working those same rounds just as we did before. Now, I've finished up round 5. I've got my loop pulled up big here, and I'm going to set that aside for a moment, and I've got all these little balls of red yarn. I'd probably make 1 or 2 more if I were making the whole eye right now, but we want to have a few of these available so that we can start adding our veins with surface crochet. And I like to add a couple of them at a time. Now, if you really didn't want to juggle all this at the same time, you could probably go ahead and make the rest of the eyeball piece without the veins and then add them afterwards all at once. I haven't tried it that way. I think it would probably be a little awkward, but at the same time, give it a try. I think, either way will work. I just like to do it as I go. So the way I did it was after the first 5 rounds or so, I went ahead and just randomly stuck my hook somewhere near the beginning. Now, I don't want to go right into the center. That's our magic circle and it's a little tight. So I'm just going to pick somewhere nearby. And I just stick my hook right through. It's the outside of our work to the inside. There's my tail end of my circle still hanging out. Now what I'm going to do is take some of my red yarn and pull up a loop here. And I'm just going to lay that right over my hook. Make sure, again, we leave a few inches here to weave in later. And then I'm just going to pull that right through here to the outside. And then I can just take off across my fabric. I can go right, I can go left, I can go straight, I can curve around, literally stick my hook somewhere else. Not too far away, about a distance away, so to speak. Yarn over, pull that loop up and through the previous loop. And I can take off, say, this direction. Same thing. Oops, just got to grab that yarn, pull it up and through, and over there. Get crazy with it. I didn't set out with a plan on any of these. We just want to make sure to pull those loops up high so that they don't, pull our fabric together. But you can go any old direction, back and forth, make Z's, lightning bolts, curves, whatever floats your boat. Then I stop usually about a row out from wherever I'm crocheting at the moment, and then I will secure that end right there with one of my stitch markers. Here we go. And I'll just put that right through that loop, and then that'll hold that. I'll just put that right through that loop, and then that will hold that right there. And then I can just leave that attached until I'm ready to come back to it after I've made a few more rows of the white. Then I can go around, find another spot, and start doing the same thing. Maybe start another row out, make another few rows of color, and just start making lines all over the white fabric. That is really all there is to it. As I continue to grow those, and I've got it a little bigger and our white spaces are getting a little, a little more spread apart, then I can add another line, come in and join this one with another line of red if I want to. And maybe take off the other direction. Let's go this way. Oop, actually, you know what? I'm going to show you what I did. I grabbed the wrong end to pull that stitch through. Not a big deal. I'm just going to pull that out. I want to use the end attached to the skein, right? That's going to work a whole lot better. So let's try that again. I'm going to put my hook in there, grab the end attached to the skein, and pull that on through. And of course, just like any other crochet stitch, if you take a few of them and you realize you don't like it, you can just pull back on that end attached to the skein, and all your stitches will come undone and you can redo them. So you can see here, I'm just adding another line off to the side. Let's say that's all I want right there. I want it to end right there. No problem. To finish off all of our lines of surface crochet, when you get to where you think you're done with it, let me get that sort of centered here again. I'm going to find the end that I'm working with. Go ahead and cut that. Then I'm going to pull up on that loop on my hook, okay? Like so. Let me get that nicely centered here so you can see what I'm doing. So I've cut the end of my yarn, I pulled up on that loop. Now it's on the right side of my fabric. So to finish that off, I could do this with a yarn needle if I wanted to go ahead and weave in the end, or for now I can just do it with my hook. Put my hook from behind up through that same space that we went into last, grab that end, and pull it on through to the back. There we go. So you can see now those ends are both in the back. We can weave them in when we're all done and clean up all our fuzzies from our cut yarn here, but we can just keep adding those veins in crazy lines all the way around. After that, we just continue basically like we did before, but we're going to have more rounds. So let me grab our finished eyeball here so we can take another look at that. So here's another look at the veins that I added to the rest of my eyeball. You can see here I started on that first round or the second round sometimes, and I added just some other ones here as I went. And indeed, this is just plain white other than adding those little surface crochet veins. So these rounds are just half double crochet. As I said, rounds 1 through 5 are exactly like we did before. Indeed, rounds through 6, we just don't have any color changes or back loop only, front loop only stuff to worry about. Then we do work a few more rounds, as you can see here, rounds 7 through 16 or 17 does make up the rest of this. And again, it's just more rounds of half double crochet worked in a spiral. So you can follow along with the written instructions. I've talked you through the first 6 rounds. The other rounds are very similar. Many of those rounds are just worked even, where we just work 1 stitch in each round. Then we have just a couple of rounds of decreases here at the bottom. So we have those rounds of decreases, and then we do switch back to the blue or whatever color you want, the outside, the color of your eye to be for the last round here. So let's talk about that together. So on our pattern for the rest of the eyeball, I'm going to jump ahead to round 18. Round 18 is going to be really similar to the way we finished off before. This is where we are going to do that single crochet in the first stitch, but this time I want you to go ahead and keep that stitch marker on there. We're going to use that because we're not going to just do a color change in the last stitch to switch back to blue, or we'd end up with a jog. We need to create a smooth line to attach our blue to. So we've got our single crochet in the first stitch. I've moved that stitch marker up. I'm going to slip stitch in the next stitch, and then I am going to go ahead and break my white yarn. Remember, this is round 18 after we've made the rest of those simple rounds of half double crochet, and we can add some more of those lines. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut that yarn end long enough to weave in. We don't need to sew with it. I can go ahead and pull that up, and I want to do the same seamless join that I did on our other piece. So I'm going to again take that yarn needle here, put that yarn end on, and go not to the next stitch, but to the stitch after that. So I can duplicate the other stitch from on top here. And then I can go ahead and weave in this end. But for now, I'm just going to tack it down. And then after that, what we want to do is before we move on to round 19, where we add our last round of the blue, we want to go ahead and finish off all of our blood vessels and weave in those ends as well. So if you have any more of these blood vessels that haven't quite finished off, or you want to add a couple more rows or a couple more curves, now is the time to do that. Again, to finish off a row of surface crochet, we just cut that yarn, pull that loop up to the front here. Let me get that stitch marker out of the way. And my hands, pull on that loop. There we go. And then, of course, again, with either our hook or with our yarn needle, we can just take and send that same end right back down where it came from. That'll hold that final loop down like that. And then we can weave in that end as well. Then we're ready for round 19. So for round 19, you want to pick up color B, which is again the color that you're using for your eye. So I know the whole thing's an eyeball, but what we think of as the eye color, this is the color B. So what we want to do is we want to join to that single crochet. That's why we kept that stitch marker in there with a half double crochet. This is also known as a standing half double crochet. So the way I like to do it is I go ahead and put a slip knot in the yarn and put my yarn on the hook here. Again, leaving a few inches here to weave in when I'm all done. And then I'm just going to hold on to this tail end to help stabilize that loop on my hook. Yarn over, just like for a half double crochet. Insert our hook right in that marked stitch. Yarn over and pull up our loop. I'm still holding on to that tail end so it stays steady. Then I can yarn over and gently pull through all 3 of those loops. There we go. And we've joined with our half double crochet. So since this is our new first stitch of the round, we want to go ahead and move our stitch marker right into this one. Although with the color change, it is a whole lot easier to see, of course. There we go. So now I think I can go ahead and move that purple out of the way a little bit so it's a little easier to see with our contrast color here in action. So after we join with that first half double crochet, then we half double crochet in the next 4 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we half double crochet 2 together. So this is a good way to show, or a good place to show rather, that there are a lot of different ways to actually half double crochet 2 together. There is the most standard way, but the most standard way I find tends to be a little bulky. I like to use it a little differently. So the way I like to half double crochet 2 together for this pattern is I'm going to go ahead and yarn over and go into the next stitch and pull up the loop. So far, so good. Normally we'd yarn over again before going into the next loop, but again, I just find that to be a little too bulky. So rather than yarning over again, I'm just going to go straight into that next stitch and pull up our loop. So now we have 4 loops on our hook, and I'm actually going to use that loop I just pulled through to pull through the other 3. So let me just grab that and pull it right on through. So you can see it's still a little bulkier than a standard half double crochet, but I find it's a little less bulky than the standard half double crochet 2 together decrease. So that's how I like to do it. So that is that decrease. So now if you're following along with the written instructions for round 19, now is when we begin our asterisk, our repeat that takes us the rest of the way around. So we half double crochet in the next 9 stitches. Let's do that together. Remember, my row here is quite a bit shorter because I have not worked all the way through round 19 first, but we can demo here together a little bit of this repeat. So half double crochet in the next 9 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then half double crochet 2 together. All that So I could show you how I do that one more time. The yarn over, go into the next stitch, pull up our loop. Then I go right into the next stitch, pull up a loop, and then pull that loop through those other 3 loops. Just a little bit cleaner decrease in my opinion, but if you prefer, you can decrease, half double crochet, whatever method you prefer. Now, this is another one of those split increase things. You'll notice we started with just 5 stitches up here. That means as we continue on around for our last repeat, we'll have an increase, and then we'll have our half double crochet in the next 9 stitches, then half double crochet 2 together, decrease, excuse me, and then there will just be 4 stitches left, and we half double crochet in those last 4 stitches. Then, at that point, we'll be working all the way around. We can go ahead and break our yarn and join right to that first stitch. So we've got just one solid round of blue all the way around. Then we're ready to assemble our eyeball. All right, so here I am at the end of round 19. I went ahead and cut my yarn. So now we can go ahead and finish up. So like I say, we don't really need the stitch marker. We can tell which one is our first stitch here. I'm going to go ahead and actually tighten up the top of that stitch and let it go away and do my seamless join to that second stitch and create a new top for that stitch. Nice and smooth. Now, when you finish up round 19 again, if you forgot to leave your long end on the first part, go ahead and make your long end now. Same thing, just go 3 times around that edge. Otherwise, go ahead and weave in that end as well as all of your other ends. Then what we're ready to do is put our ball inside this bottom half, the rest of the eyeball, the piece with the veins. Again, this should be much larger at this point. And in this last round, round 19, you should have 60 stitches, which is the same number we ended up with here on this final round. So what you can do after you stuff your ball in there, mine isn't going to fit. This is what mine looks like that I use. I use a 10-inch microbead pillow ball, and I have these linked in the written pattern as well as in the video tutorial on mooglyblog.com. But if you don't want to use one of those, you can just use your standard fiber fill it up, make it as firm or as soft as you like, and then you start matching up those stitches. I recommend using your stitch markers at this point, safety pins if you don't have them, and you can just go stitch for stitch. Now, it doesn't matter, how you turn your eye versus the back, completely up to you. If you want your veins to be a certain way, match up your eyeball the correct way there. But you'll just go all the way around and match up stitch for stitch. You don't have to put the stitch markers through every pair. I kind of do every 5, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll count up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to make sure I match them up perfectly, and just continue to do that all the way around. Once I've got those matched up, as you can see here, I'm going to insert a picture from the pattern, from the written pattern, and you can see here, this was my eyeball. I made just how tight those stitch markers were pulling. However, as tight as that was, when it was time to sew them together, we just took our yarn needle and went through each pair of stitches one by one, and it pulled it right together. It is a very firm feeling ball, so with the microbead pillow ball. So if you don't want it to be very firm, you might prefer using fiber fill. And that's how to crochet the Spooky Eyeball Squish using Bernat blanket. You'll find the free written pattern on mooglyblog.com, so you can simply search Moogly Blog Spooky Eyeball Squish or click one of the links in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.